Experience Karen Hunter in a completely different way. Karen Hunter is awesome. The podcast.
If you like me on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, you're gonna love me. And Karen Hunter is awesome. Hey, this is Karen Hunter, host of the Karen Hunter Show on SiriusXM's Urban View. Karen Hunter is awesome is an actual podcast to bring heat and energy and knowledge and power. A 1-2 punch that I don't think you get anyplace else. Tell the truth. Check out the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You will not be disappointed. I can't wait to talk to this woman. I've been in her book all day, just like, oh my goodness, because we are at this place where it's important for us to think about resistance. What does that look like? And I think we're going to have to think about resistance. Let me welcome to the show. She is a professor. She is the author of We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance. Let me welcome the great Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. Hey.
Hey there. Happy Black History Month.
Every damn day, ma'am.
Every day.
Shoot, we don't play that. Yes, 365 every single day.
Yes.
And that's the reality is we are history. You spell that out. There's really no history in this country that doesn't center Black oppression or black resistance. It's centered. So
True.
Tell us what inspired you to write this We Refuse.
Oh, man. So this book sort of started with an op-ed. I wrote an op-ed right after the death of George Floyd to talk about the double standard of American protest. And it's interesting. I didn't set out to write a book. I had a whole nother book on my roster, and a bunch of publishers hit me up like, hey, is this a book? Is this a book? And I was like, sure. Yeah. But then, as the summer of 2020 progressed, I found myself more angry, more upset, more frustrated. And then the pages really started to flow. It went from being an op-ed to a full-fledged book very quickly. And I wrote it because I wanted to talk about this false dichotomy that we're given between violence or nonviolence, this idea that we have to choose to either be a Malcolm X or a Martin Luther King, as though these models are the only options that we have. And I wanted to push back on this idea of seeing the protest and even seeing nonviolence as the only sort of tool available to Black people. I wanted to kind of talk about the limitations of nonviolence. And I wanted to talk about how we can get creative and should get creative and strategic about things that are not just nonviolent, but are things that are effective. And that's what I saw in the summer of 2020. I saw a lot of protests and a lot of hashtags and a lot of marching, but I didn't see any structural change. I saw symbolic change. I saw street names change, or some statues came down, and Aunt Jemima got a new name. But none of this was stuff we asked for. None of this was. I was like, didn't we say abolish the police?
We got Juneteenth as a holiday.
We got Juneteenth as a holiday. We didn't ask for that, so we were going to do that regardless. It's wild.
Listen, I want to have an honest conversation, and we'll get into some chapters and verses in the book. Howard University's own HU. In the house. That's right. Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. I am on these airwaves and there's like an edict that we can't, promote violence, which I don't. And I don't, as a person, want to promote violence. And I feel we live in a world, though, that is wildly violent and has been wildly violent towards us. You talk about George Floyd. I'm old enough to remember James Byrd. I'm old enough to remember, we had George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna. I remember James Byrd. And that felt even more chilling to me because that was a man walking home at his business and got dragged until his torso fell off. And it reminded me of Without Sanctuary. And I was like, we live in this country where violence is the rule of law. And we're the only ones supposed to not respond or react to it. And now we're at a place where we have spent generations not bearing arms, not protecting ourselves. People taking pictures with hundreds of guns and they're at the range, like they are preparing for a war that we're not prepared for. So I can't responsibly talk about what should be the reaction because we're not ready. We don't have the numbers, the firepower. So how do we have this conversation?
I mean, I think that one of the things my students have taught me, Gen Z has taught me, is that like binaries don't work. So this idea of like good, bad, right, wrong, black, white, it's not expansive enough. And violence and nonviolence is not expansive enough to really think about all the ways that Black people have combated white supremacy. I break my book into, 5 chapters of revolution and force and protection and flight and joy. And these aren't even exhaustive tools either. There's more tools I could have added had I not had a deadline. I could have added to this book. But I push back on violence for a couple of reasons, and nonviolence for a couple of reasons too. I push back on violence because I think at the end of the day, most Black people are just trying to live their lives. Most Black people want justice. They don't want revenge. I think that revenge is a white imaginary project. I think that white people are consumed with revenge, but Black people just want to live their lives.
Can we sit there for a second? Because this is it. People, and this is people, not white, Black, whatever. People judge people based on what they would do, not based on the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
So absolutely. We're living in a world like the fear is you're going to do what was done to you, but that's not how we move because you don't know us. You only know us through a very, very narrow lens. That's media, that's music, and that's the subservient way in which many of us have to behave. But you don't know the full complexity of Blackness, right?
No.
But the fear is the revenge. You're going to enslave us.
The fear is revenge. And I honestly don't think white people are actually afraid of revenge. I think white people are afraid of justice because justice is more costly. It really is. Justice requires forfeiture. Justice requires that you relinquish your hold, your control on power. That to white people is more terrifying because we don't have a precedent for revenge. There is no moment in history in which 4 white little girls are killed before they're worshiping in a church service. There's no story in which, a Black man goes into a white church and then shoots everybody up in the white church. There's no history. There's no moment in which Black people storm the Capitol because they're upset their candidate did not win. I mean, we don't have historical precedents for Black violence, for Black vengeance. There is no white Tulsa. There is no white Greenwood in which Black people destroy white communities. So the idea that Black people want revenge, I say, is ridiculous because never through history have we seen that. Even if you look at slave rebellions were actually not about revenge either. It was about justice and about turning the system of slavery. So I look at that a lot and I look at sort of the fallacy of that. And I also think to myself that when we think about nonviolence and how these things play out, I think in some ways, and I want to be careful how I say this, but in some ways, nonviolence has become a tool of the state. It has become a way to keep Black people impotent, a way to keep Black people from actually affecting change. And so if the government is like, yeah, sure, protest, hashtag, that's not going to change anything, then that's not actually the activism that I want. But on the other hand, I don't think guns are going to do it either.
No, as Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson, to that point, it's something I inherently knew. The marches are performative. Institutional structural change requires planning. So when you start this book with the preface in W.E.B. Du Bois's mind with those 700 pages and look at Reconstruction, I said, oh, this is brilliant because that work most of us have not read. And I immediately got on, my text and I said, Ahmad, can you make sure that this book is available, the PDF in Nubia, because we have the space and narrative, actually, narrative.com, the K is silent, so that people can actually read what W.B. Du Bois did. And let me just say, I'm inspired, and that made me smile because I'm here doing this work the way I'm doing it primarily because of the introduction that I had to Dr. Greg Carr.
And love him. Yes.
Of course, he is the pinnacle of what I think of as a scholar in today's world, similar to, of course, John Henrik Clarke, but also to a W.B. Du Bois, combined with a Carter G. Woodson. But this man, I remember we had a conversation about the souls of Black folk, which is also available on Narrative, that you can watch our discussion about it in the book, and we embedded into the book. And he talked about Du Bois's 100-year plan, where he was looking at 10 levers of things that needed to happen in the Black community. And he was going to study these 10 things for 10 years each. And I said, what a project.
Yeah.
What happened? You know, he made transition before I think he got to the third or the fourth thing that he was studying, but nobody's picked that baton up, you know? And those things are still education, economic empowerment, self-defense, all of that was factored in. And then you start with the Reconstruction period. Even that we don't study. Like what?
No, you the least studied period in American history. I think we just skip it.
Come on, 4 million people free.
Yeah.
Overnight, and somehow the world didn't collapse. And in fact, communities talk about it.
I mean, I write about this in my book too. I'm like, when we think about the age of revolutions, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, revolutions require structural change. Revolutions require that broken systems don't just get sort of repaired or reformed, but eradicated and replaced with just systems. You don't have a revolution in the United States. You have a local or a foreign distant is replaced with local power. You don't really have a revolution in France. You have a revolution in Haiti because slavery gets abolished. They don't just overthrow a colonial power. They abolish the institution of slavery. The real revolution is not 1776. It's actually 1865. You might even say 1863, like America's conceived of in 1776, but it's given birth to in 1863 with that Emancipation Proclamation where 3 million of the 4 million people enslaved are freed from the institution of slavery. And you get the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery, the 14th Amendment that gives us citizenship, the 15th Amendment that gives Black men the right to vote. That was revolutionary. Not only that, in Reconstruction, you get the first education systems, the first public school systems are started as a result of Reconstruction. Black and white children are now going to school for free. You get the first public health systems because the Civil War was so violent, not because of bullets, but mostly because of disease. So they had to come up with a public health system that would keep people well and healthy. You get that in Reconstruction. You have over 1,500 Black elected officials that go from being enslaved to elected officials. You don't get that anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere other than Haiti. Do you get Black people that go from being slaves to being president? But this is a radical shift, a dynamic shift. And I think we don't talk about it for several reasons. One, because it's so short-lived. I mean, there's a lot of change that's made, but instantaneously there's backlash. I mean, the Klan has its origin story in Reconstruction. There are race riots that are taking place all over the country. They have to keep Union soldiers in the South to keep these race riots from popping off. And this is also a period in which white liberals, two things happening. Some of them are dying off. They're old. They've been in this game for a long time and no one's picking up their mantle and they're tired. And it was very easy for them to sort of forfeit Black empowerment for their own personal goals. And within a short amount of period, within a generation, a lot of those Black rights are now rolled back, completely lost, and you go back into the darkness again. Du Bois says it in Black Reconstruction. He says the Negro stood free for a moment in the sun and then moved back into darkness. And it's this idea that, yes, these things are actually possible. Change is actually possible, but you have to sustain it. The hard work of revolution is not actually we ride at dawn. The hard work of revolution is, how do you sustain the victory? How do you maintain the victory? That's what Haiti's still struggling with. How did we sustain and maintain the victory from France, the victory from colonial oppression? We still have not been able to secure that. You can't rest on your laurels,
Yeah. Let's talk about how we can, because I'm a how we can type of person.
Yes, same.
Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. Also, ironically, I feel like with the dismantling of education, public health, and all of these systems that came out of Reconstruction, out of the freedom that was secured by mostly the people that got on the battlefield and walked off plantations to secure it, we're going right back again.
I know.
From Obama to Dark Ages once again.
Introducing a new podcast. Karen Hunter is awesome.
If you like me on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, you're gonna love me. And Karen Hunter is awesome. Hey, this is Karen Hunter, host of the Karen Hunter Show on SiriusXM's Urban View. Karen Hunter is awesome is an actual podcast to bring heat and energy and knowledge and power. A 1-2 punch that I don't think you get anyplace else. Tell the truth. So check out the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You will not be disappointed.
Karen Hunter is awesome. A new podcast from Karen Hunter.